everybody, and welcome to our next talk, The 5 Pillars, How to Implement Salesforce in a Grown and Complex Organization. So we have Theo and Raul here. Thank you very much for taking the time, and they will talk a little bit about their experience with, I would say, rather large Salesforce project that they did end of last year at Spryker. So Theo is actually senior BI analyst at Spryker. He's not just implemented Salesforce, he's also built their first data infrastructure. And basically they took up the challenge together with Raul, who is one of the operational people at Project A. He's actually our head of sales and customer success. And he's been working and advising over 30 of our portfolio companies on everything around sales. And I always say Raul is the biggest sales nerd I know. So I think it's going to be a very insightful talk here. And the stage is yours, guys. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Christoph. So hi, everyone. My name is Raul. I'm head of sales and customer success, as was said, at Project A. And in that department, a lot of the things that we deal with are, for example, CRM implementations. I myself have seen maybe 12 to 15 different CRMs being implemented in different functionalities, sometimes building them myself, sometimes following the project as an owner or the project manager, or sometimes just on the business end of the side. But this is also something that we do. I would even call it bread and butter of our daily business. Of the last 8 projects we've done, 5 or 6 had something to do with Salesforce. And maybe quick introduction to how today is going to be. So Theo and me are going to have a couple things that we wanted to go through, and that will take somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. And then we also have ample time in the end already planned for Q&A, because we do think that CRM and also the things we're going to talk about are quite extensive, and there can be some questions from the crowd. And afterwards, we're going to be in Wonder as well. So I think there's more than enough time to talk about what it is we want to talk about.
Awesome. Thanks, Raul. So my name is Theo Tortorici. I'm senior BI analyst at Spryker. My first project at Spryker was developing a data infrastructure, but right after we collaborated with Raul to implement Salesforce over the last year, and we're super excited to share the learnings about this experience and hopefully make it useful for you.
Yeah. So what is it that we want to do today? As we said, the whole learning and the whole framework that we're going to share with you today is based on Theo and me going through a story of about a whole year, starting with, I would say, the inception of a project, moving over to implementing it and rolling it out, but then also sitting down afterwards and thinking about what happened and why did it happen, and maybe even why did it work out. And to go to where we want to go, first we're going to start with that story. Then we're going to present you the 5 pillars, as we call them. This is the framework that we came up with. And the 5 pillars, as you will see, are 5 different people, but also 5 different things that you need to get a CRM project going well. And then lastly, the magic that those 5 pillars can make happen. And if we do that, I think actually there'll be a good storyline that we can go through. But for you, what is it that we would be looking to achieve? And for us, it would be great, of course, if you're a little bit entertained and you have some questions and maybe you can come up with some clarity. But particularly, it might help if you come out with a helpful framework that you can apply, of course, to CRM implementations, but also to all kinds of different areas. That's number 1. And we think that that's possible. Number 2, if you're having an immediate project that you're having right now, an ongoing project, or even an upcoming one, it might be something that can help you as a framework. Or even, and I would give you that task actually, if this is something you're doing right now, then maybe go through the 5 pillars as we present them and think about, do you have these in place right now? Maybe do that exercise as we talk about what it is we're talking about. And a little bit of a secret hope that we also have is the 3rd one, which is that there's a chance that maybe one of you or more people of you are actually sitting in the crowd who know deep in their hearts that they should be implementing a new CRM, but they're holding off. And you might even call it they're procrastinating on it. And it could have different reasons. One of those reasons could be that they don't know where to start. And we hope that a framework such as ours can help them as a catalyst for actual action, get things moving. And who knows, maybe even 1 or 2 projects might start with some inspiration coming from this. So that would be really cool. why is it that we are taking, by the way, a double slot for this whole thing, and also why we sat down for many more than just 2 nights to discuss this topic. And why is it that we are talking about a time span of about a year? The truth is that CRM implementations are usually some of the bigger projects you can have in an organization, in a startup. It's also usually one of the most challenging things you can do, especially as you mature a little bit. In the case of Spryker, which at the time was already a little bit more mature, that was actually the most important, but also probably the most challenging project of the entire year. So we did that last year, end of 2019, and even in 2019 and through the beginning of 2020, this was by far the most important thing the company did as a project. And there's a lot of pitfalls, I would say. There's a lot of fears that people have why they wouldn't start it. And we think that we found some solutions to that. And Theo is going to give you an intro to what actually was the situation at Spryker at the time.
So after reviewing a little bit of the literature, after discussing with a couple of agencies, and also based on personal experience with other tech projects, the most common reason for failures when implementing a CRM implementation are one, selecting the wrong software or the wrong vendor. Second, ending up with a product that lacks some functionalities or poorly developed functionalities, which basically drive low adoption of the product. And eventually, or third, the project being mismanaged, which translates generally by going over timeline, wrong scope, and over budget. But it obviously does not have to be this way. And what we're hoping to achieve is by sharing our trials and tribulation, hopefully you can make a project like this a success. So now let's look at the case of Spryker. For those of you who don't know who Spryker is, we're selling e-commerce platform for B2C and B2B use cases, and we're basically waging wars against SAP, Oracle, Adobe, or Shopify. Now, post 2018, right after our Series B, we started basically developing a vision for scaling the sales function and bring the organization to the next level. But we were facing a couple of challenges, like not having the proper CRM. We had one at the time, but it didn't really match our ambition. So that's when we decided to move to Salesforce. Now, fast forward mid 2019, it's been 1.5 years that the project is on the table. It's our second kickoff attempt. We've already started paying for Salesforce licenses. They're ready to be used, and yet the project is stalled. So for us, what went wrong here? Why did it take so much time to actually start the implementation? And what was the alignment of planets that allowed to make it a success? So we'll look into those. So looking at all the factors, the first one is, was there pain? Well, absolutely. I think there was, at the time, not a single person involved in sales at Spryker that was not complaining about the CRM we had at the time, which was Pipedrive. There were issues about data quality, mismatch between technology and processes, lack of functionality, lack of automation, etc., etc. So out of this pain came a vision, building a strong foundation to scale the sales unit, the sales department at Spryker. By then, we were already more than doubling revenue every year, and we had plan of also increasing the sales team more than double fold to match our growth ambitions. There was C-level buy-in, so we didn't need to convince anyone anymore that this project was really needed. The technology was chosen. Salesforce basically dominated our selection process, and again, here was clear that we had to go with Salesforce. And then finally, we had budget allocated already, so money was not a problem. So we had all those things that are sometimes not so easy to clear, and yet something was missing. for a year, we couldn't get the project started. So what was this piece missing? Where that was actually the key people. The key people were not in place. The VP of operation that was in charge of handling the project, the owner of the project, didn't have the resources to actually being hands-on. The sales director that had laid out all the processes basically left. We didn't have a Salesforce admin, a Salesforce expert in-house, and we had difficulty building trust with the agency that was supposed to implement the system. And so that's a learning. We did a little bit of insight, how critical having the right people was to actually kick off the project that second time, and really manage to go through. And that's because it's so important that we decided to focus the angle of this presentation around those people that made this project possible.
Yeah. So going back again, the whole talk is going to be about the 5 pillars. Keep in mind, please, that this is not something that we had top down when we started the project, but it's something that we understood better and better as the project went on. As we said, it was about a 1-year thing, and that we only really formulated a short while ago when we thought back to what were the success factors. And we actually think that a lot of the things that went well, and especially that went well as compared to what didn't go well before, were due to having the right people in place and the right pillars in place. So at least in our opinion, we are heavily convinced that this was one of the biggest success factors. And let's jump into them. Keep in mind, what you're going to see might look quite common sense, but I think as we're going through who these people actually are, and then especially in the magic part, how they interact and how the magic happens that they can produce, I think that's where you might be taking away a couple of things. And so the task, as we said, if you have something coming up or if you have something you're doing right now, maybe use this as a mental checklist and think about the people you have in place right now and think about whether that fits what you should be having. Thinking about the whole project, though, just for you to make it very clear, what are the 5 pillars actually going to do for you? If you think about the implementation via the rollout to a live system, during the implementation, having the right people in place is going to make the implementation obviously much easier, meaning possibly also cheaper or faster. And it's usually also going to increase quality dramatically, which is probably the most important thing. If you're going to think about a system that you would like to even drive success in your company with, then that system first needs to stick. That's how we call it here. And that happens during rollout. Making it stick means making the system applicable to the situations that it needs to be applicable to, making people or having people use the system, and then improving it to actually do what it is you need to do with it. And that happens during rollout. We think that this is also part where having the right people in place with a conscious effort can drive making it stick much more. And if you think about the period when you have a live system, having these things in place can enable growth dramatically. As we will go through later on during the magic part, this is actually also part of what we're going to talk about and showcase there. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Very simply, to us, the 5 people, I'll talk about that later on though, if it's not 5 people though, that you need for a CRM project are the project owner, domain expert, tech expert, a builder, and a user. And what we're going to do now is go step by step through each of those pillars and look at 3 things. Number 1 is, what are they there for? Why do you need them? Number 2 is, what kind of experience should those people have? So what kind of person are you looking for? And then number 3, who could that be? So maybe you already have someone in place who could be exactly that person. First one, the project owner to us. Very simple, as it says in the title, they should be accountable, but also hold ownership of the project and especially manage the project. Which is why also they should have obviously strong project management skills. They should be able to be a central communication node between different people of the organization that is also able to get people to do stuff. As we said, they should be able to kick ass and make people move. Or in other words, they should be the grease between decision matrices in an organization. And to do that, they really should understand the history, the political context, but also the people of the organization they're working in. Because of that, we think an ideal person for a project owner would be if you have someone already a project manager in-house, maybe some general biz dev people with maybe a little bit of experience, or someone a little bit higher, sales ops manager, for example. And ideally, they would be internal, and specifically, most of all, because they need a little bit of internal knowledge and internal network to get things moving. Second, the domain expert. And with domain, we mean the area of expertise that you're implementing a new system in. So if you're building a CRM for sales, then you need sales experts. And obviously, they need to be the people driving the vision of what it is that we really need, and with what priority do we need that, right? There are going to be, later on, we're going to talk about nice to haves and MVPs, and those should be the people driving that decision. They should also be the people responsible for the processes themselves many times. And finally, the people who look at what has been built and judge and be judging whether that's fitting and that whether that's good enough or not. And they should know, obviously, where they want to go, but also as it is right now. So how are things actually in Pipedrive? How are things actually in the current CRM? Now, who are those people usually going to be? Many times it's just a department head, the head of sales, the VP marketing. And you would be usually looking at people internally, although there can be cases where it would make sense to take someone externally if you're missing some of that expertise. The first two are, I would think, quite common sense, but here I think is where it gets a little bit more interesting. And most projects that I've seen are missing someone who would be called a technology expert. And that technology expert is usually just someone where you rely on the agency or whoever is building the system for you to do it. But we think it's actually a different part of the whole equation. Because the tech expert is supposed to be a translator from business to the builder and back from the builder. And they should really understand this system extremely well. So in the case of Salesforce, for example, that was the biggest part that I played in the whole equation, was I really needed to run back and forth between people and translate all the time what it is that the other part needed to understand. And I could do that because I actually understand the system very well. And I have a certification, and that is something that you'll be looking at, by the way. Someone with deep expertise in a given system. Also someone who's obviously able to consult on that, so they should know some best practices, see some results before already, and that should heavily drive on what the system should be going for. And this can be hard to find, but you have a couple different ways for this to go about this. If you're lucky, you have someone in-house. If you're lucky again, with the agency that's building the system for you, they can do that. Keep in mind, though, that many times an agency is going to tell you that they consult you well, but they're not actually going to do that. And one of the common pitfalls, I think, is that you're talking to, I don't know, a CRM implementation agency about Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever, and you're talking to the founders, the partners who are really smart, who make a great impression on you, but then the people who are actually building the thing are not actually really advising you very well. So just keep that in mind. Or it could be freelancers. There's a couple different ways you can go about this. Very simply, you have the people who need to build the whole thing. I think that makes sense. They need to be able to work in a very precise manner and communicate back when things might not stick to budget, time, or scope, and also what can work and what cannot work. So they have to have absolute certain knowledge about the thing that they're going to work on, where the tech expert might sometimes know every last click or every last functionality. The builder has to, obviously, right? You're not gonna build I don't know, whatever kind of website from the ground up without having one who actually knows how to code. And they should be able to communicate these things as well. And you have a lot of different ways to go about this. You could have an internal admin or even build one up, hire one or build one up. You could go with an agency that usually goes about this, or a freelancer. You have different ways to go about this. I think the differentiating factor is, do they have the certifications and the skills needed to build the thing that you need? And lastly, and I think this is also something that is often underused, so second part, adding to the tech expert that is often underused, is a user. And oftentimes we think what happens and what we've seen happen is a system is being built and it's being thrown to the users, and then they're just supposed to live with it. But we think it's actually a good idea to make the users part of the implementation. Just in general, we like the term sanity check, just to look at things and say, well, it's nice that you're sitting in the ivory tower thinking about your processes, but this is not how things work in real life. They should also be involved quickly in testing, as we're going to see a little bit later. And they should really be people that you can trust and go to and can ask questions whether this makes sense or not. So usually this would be someone like a senior salesperson or someone who maybe recently joined, but they're very, very motivated to get this thing rolling. To sum this up and to give an example too, importantly, the 5 pillars do not have to correlate with 5 different people. And that's because it could be that the same person takes on multiple roles. In fact, in the Spryker project, Theo, me, and Simon, who was another person in there, we all took on 2 or 3 different roles at the same time. So roles can be shared also between different people. In this example, we have 3 key users, a BDR, an account executive, and an analyst. And we have the sales ops manager actually doing 2 things. So keep in mind, we think it makes sense to have all 5 of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be 5 people. All right. Now, what can we do with those 5 people?
Yeah, so Raul presented those 5 persona in an isolated way, but what we've really seen is that once those people are in place, the magic really happens during collaboration. Yeah. So the first thing that having those people in place enable is a well-defined scope and project methodology. And so here the goal is to share some best practices that we've seen or experienced. So the first best practice is MVPing everything. So in terms of MVP, your domain expert and user will basically be responsible of defining what are the must-have and what are the nice-to-have. The goal is to ship as fast as possible a stable system that your organization can already start using. And then once we have a workable system, then it can be further improved. So you've all heard of minimum viable product, which would be the minimum set of functionalities. And here we've defined as well minimum viable process. In that case, in order to reach this stable system, maybe we don't need all the automation when working on leads or opportunity. And so the domain expert will tell us this. And then finally, minimum viable data. In the case of Spryker, there was a lot of complaints about lack of data quality in the original CRM system. And the goal was, with the introduction of Salesforce, to start fresh and to make sure that when the system was used the first time for the first data migration, we only migrated, let's say, opportunities that were about to be closed in the next coming month. And then once the quality was assured for first migration, then we iterated. The second best practice comes when aligning on time, scope, and budget. And it's not just about aligning at the beginning on those 3 dimensions, but it's also about how are we going to monitor progress in those 3 dimensions. And so here, the main tool that we used was basically burn down. And the idea is once we've defined the scope, we know how long each functionality is supposed to take, how much budget is allocated to that. Then we're able to track what is being done, what has been done versus what was planned. And this obviously typically falls under the realm of the project owner. And then finally, and this is where the technology expert and the builder will advise the most, it's on the working methodology. So our first recommendation is work object by object. And that in Salesforce terms, that means work with package functionality to facilitate gathering requirements and testing. We worked in sprints with tickets. The tickets was the main tool with which the builder developed the functionality. We also made use of 2 different environments, a sandbox where we were basically developing the functionality. And once they were tested, then we were deploying for users, for real users.
Yeah. So a second one, and I'll just go over this because it's actually quite simple to grasp, but we just want to highlight how important we think it is to translate the overall architecture and also language of the system to the business people. So if you're looking at maybe business, as in the domain experts and the users on one side, and then maybe the builders on the other side, it's going to make your project much better when you have a common understanding and a common language between them. And if you look at the example of Salesforce, this is a very simple schematic on the right of how Salesforce could be connected with when it comes to the objects, so how the architecture would look like. And what we did, for example, in the Spryker project is that we started off without doing this first. We saw that there were some hiccups. It was a little bit rough. And then we actually sat down for quite a long time, especially with the project owner, Theo, me, and a couple other people. And I first put a common ground between everything and a common language as well. And we aligned on what is actually the architecture of a Salesforce system, which led to us having a much improved efficiency of communication. So, for example, I never had to explain again what a validation rule was. I could just say validation rule, which made it very easy to gather requirements and talk about things in the system. And also, it was very clear because we were very precise about our language, what we were actually meaning. And there was no more miscommunication, which there was a lot of in the beginning. And what I've also seen happen many times is, as I sit down and discuss and lay out how a system looks, the people who are supposed to be the domain experts, in their minds, they have these ideas of what they want to happen, but they're not quite able to put it into practice yet and to explain it. And as you're explaining an architecture of a system, many times it's like you're pulling the thoughts out of their head and putting them right on the canvas of what it is you're building. And it's quite a beautiful thing, even if you want to say, because you see that actually they're very happy that they can finally get rid of the thoughts in their head. And many times it even opens up new ideas for possibilities. So we just think that it's time very well invested to especially have the tech expert translate and lay common ground of what it is that we're actually talking about.
The third very nice thing that having those 5 pillars enabled is basically having efficient interfaces between the business team and the tech teams, and that basically increased the speed of gathering requirements, development, testing, and improving the quality. So what I'm going to walk you through looks more complicated than it is. We'll just go through it in a second, and you'll get it very fast. The idea is what we went through all throughout the implementation was basically a series of loops and iterations, and that starts with requirements. So before developing a certain functionality in a certain way, the builder needs a bunch of inputs from the business people. The tech expert will do the first translation and tell the domain expert and the users what kind of process requirements the builder needs to develop the functionality. The project owner is responsible for consolidating all those requirements and sitting down with the tech expert to basically transform those requirements into tickets. Then, Raul, can you move on? Perfect. Then based on those tickets, the builder will carry on with development of the functionality. And then third, about testing. Perfect. Once the builder develops the functionality, it's time for release. And here there will be 2 rounds of validation. First, the tech expert will make sure that the functionality is working. And then the user will make sure that the process on top of the functionality is enabled. And once both those validations are checked, then it's time to sign off the functionality and move on to another one. Yeah. So when you look at when you look at those loops and those iterations, it's very easy to see what could go wrong if one piece in the cog is missing. So, for example, if the text expert is missing, then it will probably take much more time for the builder and the domain expert to align, and that could possibly run over time. If the project owner is not there to for example, when requirements don't come as fast, then again, it's additional delays.
Yeah. I think one thing that was always surprising for me, because I really don't like looking at graphs like this, is that they look like they make things more complicated, but in practice, this actually sped us up, I would say, 5 to 7 or 8 times in actually delivering things. So while it looks like this is more complicated than it is, this can be a very well-oiled machine. And I saw this in practice a couple of times now, where it just makes things so fast and it enables you to get things out in 2 months instead of 6. And maybe last thing, so when you're actually building the system, you're done, you've implemented the system, you're not finished yet. If you want to have a sticky system, then you really need to have a rollout that is being actively managed. such as by the project owner. This is not something that can just be thrown to the people and then you're done. You should have the project owner who still feels responsible for aligning people and managing the rollout itself. You can have the leaders or the process owners, the domain experts, who should make absolutely sure that there's a consequence of actions of using the system. So very simple thing. Most people have heard that. What's not in the system doesn't exist. So this is a rule that they should also enforce by, for example, having weekly meetings, and the forecast meeting should be done only in Salesforce. And if the numbers are not in Salesforce, well, then it doesn't exist. I can almost promise you, I don't know your salespeople, but if you have one salesperson missing their compensation, their monthly bonus, just a single time, because they didn't enter it in Salesforce, first of all, they'll fight you, but then after that, they will do whatever it is that you want them to do in the system, because that's where it hurts them. You will have the tech expert whose main role is to train people and educate, quite simple. The builder should not just move away after implementing a system, but they should stick around. We call it hypercare. They should be super fast and responsive in responding to bugs, where in a live system, you could take maybe a month to solve a bug. In hypercare, you should try to do it in a week max. And for the users, best case, you find some people who can be the people responsible within the departments to make others better, right? Product champions, we call them. To sum it up, for us, it was important to explain the 5 pillars because we really see a lot of potential in thinking about the people that you need this way. We also, I hope that's fine. Are you fine with the sound? Yeah. We also think that what really matters is the magic between those people, and we gave just some examples. This is not exhaustive. There's many more things that you can get done. And I think you will see as you have more and more pillars that you can increase speed and you can also increase quality. Again, for us, this was a process where it took us about a year to come up with these things. And even after having 10 projects before that, I never registered it like this. So I think this was quite a good exercise for us. We hope you took something away from that. And we still have about 8 minutes for questions if there are any. We're not too many people in the chat, so I think we could try requesting a mic, or if not, then maybe Christoph already has some questions he filtered out.
Yes, absolutely. So if you want, you can use the grab the mic feature now and ask a question. Otherwise, there are still 2 open ones in the chat. One is from Nusha. He's asking, looking back, what was your biggest misconception? Or on the other hand, what was your biggest learning when you started this project?
So specific to this project, I think the biggest mistake that was made in the beginning was trying to do things, I would say, the easy way, and hoping that would work, or that it would take, I don't know, you could do a project like this on the low side. If we're thinking about Spryker, it's easily one of the biggest companies in our portfolio, and they were way too mature at the time already, with way too much baggage also, to just have a project like this with a hands-off approach. So I think this kind of approach, trying to get it done with one person who's like do all kinds of a jack of all trades, this doesn't work. You really need those people in place, and they need to be well orchestrated. And the more we did that, the easier things became. And again, it seems like it becomes more complicated because you're having all those slides and things that they're doing, but in real life, everything is much easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe a second question from Michael here, because this relates to the roles a little bit, and he's asking, after the actual implementation phase, which kind of roles do you need to stick around? So the builder, do you need to have them, or is it just the other roles? And what kind of profile would they have?
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can take this one. So when the project was finished, so there were multiple new actors. So the builders didn't stay in terms of the agency. So we stopped the contract with the agency, and then we hired a Salesforce admin, which basically took on the role and the responsibility of the hypercare. We also had we were very lucky in the sense that we recruited a CCO that worked extensively in the customer success team at Salesforce. And so Chris Rau at Spryker, and Chris basically laid out the vision of how to take this recently developed Salesforce at the MVP level to a much more fledged out solution So that was also very good. So we hired sales admin. We had the vision given by Chris, and then myself, I took back my role in BI, and I basically was charged of developing a lot of the reporting that enabled also the adoption of the system.
And maybe adding to that, because that's a discussion Theo and I had as well, was who should you actually... Oh, actually, the next question Daniel is writing actually goes to exactly what I was going to talk about. So who should you be working with? Maybe let's mix that together. First of all, should you be working with agencies or freelancers? I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Namely, I love working with a freelancer instead of an agency because it makes the whole loop much easier. You have less people to go through, and very often you will have consistency in people. So if you think about a big agency, many times you might have one project manager who collects the tickets and everything, but in the back door, like behind the scenes, there's 10 people working on those tickets. And sometimes those 10 people have no idea what you really mean or what your company is. And that can be really quite tough on you. Also, that agency might force you to go about things their way and maybe not exactly the way you want to go about. So you're a little bit less flexible. On the other hand, an implementation agency can do things that a freelancer cannot, namely mobilize 10 people from now to next week, possibly, or to next month, and have speed that you might not have otherwise. And sometimes even have, because they have many different people, expertise in areas that one single person might not have. So I know the system really well, but I don't know everything about it. But an agency might know the last little things in products, and that might take out the last 10% that we really need. That's one thing. For a freelancer, the advantage is you can just, and that's the work mode I like, just sit them right next to you and just have very simple communication ways. You tell them something, they build it, they show it to you, they're like, did you mean this? And you're like, no, let's do it differently. And that can be very fast again, but it heavily depends on having a good freelancer. So, and they're not easy to find. It's already not easy to find a good agency, and a good freelancer is very difficult. So my recommendation is, if you find someone, get them, try with a freelancer if it's not too big of a project, and if the speed is fine.
Maybe we can take one more question. I see Anya's question regarding Scrum framework. That pretty much is a Scrum framework. I think it became clear that was the best way to go after the let's say the failure of the first attempt to kick off the project. When we arrived, basically our project management team had written a massive list of all the user stories that should be enabled in Salesforce. But the problem was all those requirements were collected in a sort of a vacuum. There was they hadn't discussed previously with experts in Salesforce. So the requirements that they came up with were really unusable. And so when we set up this Scrum framework where there's this iteration loop between the tech team and the business process team, that made things so much faster.
You probably have time for even more. If there's another question.
Anya, just a question: Do you see need for Scrum Master?
Yes, so we keep using ticketing system. We recruited a sales admin that unfortunately left after 6 months. But a person within our organization stepped up and took this role, and we're still using a ticketing system. So whenever there are bugs coming from the users, or when we break down new functionalities into tickets, that person takes on those tickets.
All right, we are almost out of time here, so I will now post the link to the Wonder session in the chat here. It's in there right now. Theo and Raul will both be there and happy to take any more answers or go into more personal one-on-one discussion. So thanks a lot for taking the time now. You can move over if you want. I will just stay in this room for a little longer so people have enough time to click the link and go over, and then I'll see you in Wonder in a bit.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.